obviously. It was going to be a live event. We're all going to be together. But it's amazing how things have changed. I guess that's impacted what you guys are doing enormously at the moment with COVID-19 and everything that's in place. So how's that working out?
Yeah, it's been clearly a really challenging 3.5 months for us all, I think, and yeah, we're all incredibly busy. But I think it's the volunteers, the length and breadth of the country. Certainly, those 4 or 5 weeks in our community clubs who work tirelessly to shut their clubs down, make them safe places, and have done some amazing stuff since, keeping things going in a virtual world. And I think we saw a huge amount of what people are missing just on that the short video there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I know we had a few sound issues, but we managed to get it played after that. So hopefully everyone enjoyed it and got to see it. I know you're going to talk for a while now for us about everything that the RFU has got planned. I know also you've been tuning into the grassroots sessions. So how have you found those?
Oh, they've been great, and I mean, firstly, just to say a huge thank you to you and the team at the Rugby Show for actually putting this on and demonstrating to us all what's possible when we can't meet up face to face. But the panels have been superb, and I particularly enjoyed the 10 o'clock one this morning. I just thought the energy. I came off really energised. The panel was superb. The stuff they were doing, just the forward thinking nature of everything they were doing was just. Yeah, it was a real shot in the arm for us all.
Oh, brilliant. Well, it's over to you now. So we look forward to hearing what you've got to say. And then please remember, everyone, get in the chat, ask your questions, and I'll be putting your questions to Steve once he's finished talking to us now. So over to you, Steve. Thanks.
Great. So thanks again to Ed and all at the Rugby Show, and thanks to everybody for joining in this afternoon. I hope we're going to have a healthy bit of debate, and hopefully all get something out of the next 40 minutes or so. I really wanted to start with another massive thank you, and that's to the volunteers in our community rugby clubs, the length and breadth of the country, who, since we took the initial decision on the 16th of March to shut rugby down, and then subsequently to end the season a week or so later, the stories and the energy and the effort has just been quite phenomenal. And we're really looking forward to the point when we can get back in front of everybody and thank them. But most of all, I think what it's demonstrated is just this amazing rugby family and rugby community that we have, and that we've all missed massively over the last 3.5 months. But as the video sort of tried to say, we will be back. In some cases, we'll be back a lot stronger. I think we learn a lot through processes like this, and who knows what the new world we're going to be in is going to be like. But one thing is for certain, our sport will survive. We will have people playing rugby again, and we will have people back in our rugby clubs, which have really demonstrated the focal part that they have right at the heart of their community. So from all of us at the RFU, those of you that are listening in from clubs, please, please, please take back a huge thank you to the volunteers in those communities. It's been a phenomenal effort. We're clearly still in a very challenging time. We don't know yet when rugby is going to be replayed. We don't know what the full impact on our clubs is going to be. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the next 20 minutes or so, and maybe give some thoughts on what we think things might be like in the future and some of the challenges we might have to face. I think the last game of rugby was played on the 15th of March. That was the last weekend that we managed to get anything in. So, we were reasonably fortunate compared to many other sports. We managed to get the bulk of our season through, spending a lot of time at the moment talking to cricket about some of the very different challenges that they're having at community level. But we were able to lock down the season quite quickly. We were able to complete the league tables and made the decision not to simply go to a null and void situation. And then we've really been spending a lot of time trying to work out the size and scale of the issue. We spent a lot of time talking to clubs, the length and breadth of the country. And the good news up until now really has been we don't have an immediate crisis. The fact that clubs had managed to bring in revenue through the season, got probably about 80% of the season complete, means that most of them were able to lock down quickly. Many of them were able to take advantage of the government loans and grants that were available and lock down the facilities. The big challenge clearly is a lost revenue opportunity over this 2 to 3 month period, the time when many clubs would be staging end of season dinners, barbecues, beer festivals, concerts, and getting together that much needed sort of buffer of revenue ready for the start of the new season. And clearly that's going to leave a hole in many clubs, and clubs are going to need to think and react differently as we go forward. Everybody's got used to working differently. We've been amazed at the take up on various Skype, Zoom, Teams, webinars, and the way in which people have embraced technology, really. Every Tuesday and Thursday night, we've been staging webinars for coaches, referees, club volunteers. We've had some fantastic support from many of the senior England team coaches and people out in the community and our team of professional referees. And, who would have thought we'd have had 400 plus people on club administrators on a webinar on a Thursday evening on VAT. We've been able to stage the RFU AGM virtually with a couple of hundred people, which is more than we normally get tuning into to that. So a lot of lessons there that we must take forward and we can take forward into the future. So no rugby right now, clearly, and no kind of real time scale in terms of when we're going to come back. We're going to touch on that a lot, but clearly that is a decision that we will make based very much on government advice and on expert medical opinion. It goes without saying that the challenge of having 16 people in a scrum, 2 scrum halves nearby, a referee, very, very close contact, that number of people together in the sort of environment that is a real and genuine challenge for us as a sport. But rest assured that our 2 major focuses, the 2 things that still sort of keep us awake at night, are player retention and club revenues. Because without players and without clubs, we don't have a community game. And clearly a lot of people very worried about, will players come back? And will they come back if we have to start at a later point, maybe than some other sports? Players, particularly maybe those with another year or 2 of playing legs in them, will they bother to come back? What will the view of parents be about youngsters going into that sort of close face-to-face contact environment again? And, you talk to 6 people on one day about those things and you'll get 6 probably different sets of opinions, but that retaining those players is key. And then the second thing clearly is making sure that the club revenues are maintained. Clubs will have to remodel, they'll have to work differently next season, just like anybody. We are exactly the same at the RFU. Our business model is really simple. We bring in revenue from matches that happen on the pitch, predominantly at Twickenham, and from events that are staged off the pitch at Twickenham, food and beverage sales, conferencing and events, business. And clearly over the last 4 months, we haven't had any of that. And we don't know yet what's going to happen with the autumn internationals. So the impact on our revenues has been massive. It was about £15 million in the last quarter of this year, and it'll be somewhere between 30 and £100 million hit next year. So we too are going to have to do things very, very differently. So right now, in terms of the player retention and the revenue, we're really focused on 4 things. We've produced a couple of weeks ago a return to rugby roadmap, 6 clear stages from A through B, C, D, E, and through to F when normal activity would be resumed. And if people haven't seen that yet, you can find it at www.englandrugby.com/coronavirus. The roadmap really sets out how we will return to some degree of the new normal. What it doesn't do is tell us when, because clearly that is triggered now by things that will happen predominantly around social distancing and around social gatherings. And clearly, those two things really important to our sport. Very difficult to play rugby in a socially distanced way, and the sort of DNA, the bedrock really of our community clubs is social gatherings. So really important that we work on that. But we're at stage B at the moment, and clearly we'll move on to C and hopefully D. Really, as soon as the size of social gatherings can increase, and we are confident with our expert medical advice that some degree of limited face-to-face contact is okay. The second thing that we've been working on are when do we and how do we return to competitive league rugby? And again, some people are of the view, just forget that next season. Others are of the view that if we don't play competitive league rugby next season, then that in itself will force and encourage many players to move away, and very different opinions from different people across the country. But on the end of last week, Friday evening, we produced the plan around returning to competitions and what they'll look like next season when we can. And in the adult game, that's really based around three playing windows. So the first one, if we can start sometime in September up to about the middle of October, it's realistic to think that we can get a full season in. Although what we've decided, based on a lot of conversations with a lot of experts in the competitions field and the divisional organising committees, the National Clubs Association, is that for the majority of our clubs, the season will start in two conferences. So each league split into two conferences. Clubs would play home and away first. And now what that does is it enables us to deal with travel challenges, because there's every likelihood that there'll still be restrictions on people from other households travelling in cars together. It also enables us to make sure there are much more local fixtures, some more local derbies potentially at the start of the season, which will assist with club revenue. If it happens that we start later in the season, it may be that it's just that conference version that runs, and it may be on a home and away, or it may just be on a home or away basis. But again, full information on all of that is on the England Rugby website in the coronavirus hub. The third thing that we're very focused on is as bars can reopen, as we all know, from the 4th of July, supporting our clubs, if they wish to do so, to think about reopening their facilities too from the 4th of July. And again, on Monday or Tuesday of this coming week, so tomorrow or the day after, we have guidance ready to be released to clubs, along with risk assessment checklists, COVID management plan guidance, all of which has importantly been cleared through our insurers, which will mean that if clubs wish to look to reopen from next weekend or the weekend after, with all the restrictions still in place that they'll need, they're able to do so. And there's some really clear and good advice and guidance there. And then the fourth thing we've been looking at is how do we keep some form of rugby activity going if we're not able to play 15-a-side contact rugby? Because it's going to be really important that in September, particularly for the minis and juniors, that we are able to get people back down through the doors of our clubs. We all know that minis and juniors, are the lifeblood, the future of the sport, but secondly, they're a really important revenue generator for many of our clubs. And probably one of the biggest fears is if that Sunday morning rugby time isn't protected in their diaries, and probably more importantly in their parents' diaries, something will very, very quickly come into that space. And then, if it takes until November, let's say, till we can get them back, the weather's a bit grottier, the days are a bit shorter, everything's not quite as easy to do, and will they have gone away and found something else to fill that space? So thinking about ways in which whether that has to be virtually or whether that's just adapted activity at those clubs on a Sunday morning, something can continue to happen. So they can still pull the club jersey on, hopefully get down to the club, if not be doing something at home or out in their local community. And when we can get back to any degree of normality, that Sunday morning will be protected as the rugby space. And equally for adult players, if we're not able to get back to 15-a-side contact rugby, we're looking at some sort of developments of a touch offering, perhaps taking many of the games that are already played in training sessions in clubs up and down the country, and looking at how we can turn those into a bit more of a competitive format, not to replace the leagues, and it's unlikely that they'd ever be used in the league structures, but it may at least allow clubs to start to travel to one another, play against each other, perhaps some festival type activity. And again, keeping players fit and active, keeping them handling a rugby ball, keeping our coaches and referees engaged, and also importantly, looking at bringing some of that club revenue in. And those things really lead us to what our current focus at the RFU is likely to be for the foreseeable future. We've had to, like many organisations, focus down our efforts. At the moment, we've still got, as an organisation, about 2/3 of our staff on furlough. So we are having to focus our efforts much more. There's going to be, for the next couple of years, a lot less money in the sport as a whole, and hence we need to make sure that that's invested where it will, we believe, make the greatest difference. And really, we'll be focused in the community space around three key things. One, around our players, and how do we make sure that we do everything we can to get back the range of playing opportunities that they want and need, get our competition structure back up and running. And that will include potentially broadening out the rugby offer. The second area will be around our coaches and referees. Without them, we don't have a game, and making sure that we do all we can to bring them back to our sport, help them to work with players differently, and make sure they're confident and their families are confident in them coming back to the sport. And then thirdly, around clubs, helping our member clubs, and we're blessed in rugby with having a fantastic network of clubs who manage and own some great assets, and without them and without the facilities that they provide and that they maintain, we really struggle to have a game. So helping them think about how they diversify their revenue streams. They're definitely going to have to think differently going forward, and how they can be really re-established as the focal points in the community. And many clubs have done some unbelievable work during lockdown, acting as food delivery bases and opening their kitchens up and making their space available for the local community. Many club members going out and doing amazing stuff in local communities. And I really hope that once we do get rebooted, we can persuade those communities to get back involved and to re-engage and to support those local rugby clubs. So fairly clear focus really on players, on coaches and referees, and on clubs. So the probably the four key components that we need to keep our game going. And those probably drive the few big issues really that we're likely to see for the next few years, as we try and reboot the game, reshaping and reimagining what might happen in our clubs. Perhaps some great opportunities here. Are we going to see rugby clubs in 5 years' time as they are now? Lots of discussion going on in many areas about communities which maybe have large number of relatively small rugby clubs beginning to collaborate and beginning to cooperate a bit more locally. Do we start to see a situation where our rugby clubs really become community hubs, community sports hubs in which, yes, rugby is played, rugby will always be the core, but how are those clubs going to maybe broaden out? And one sort of quick analogy on that, I was out running during lockdown and was thinking about this and thinking about what our clubs might look like going forward, and ran past a Shell petrol station. And it got me thinking, because the Shell petrol station also had in it a Marks and Spencer's, also had it an Amazon locker, and was also selling all that sort of firewood and everything else that goes outside of many of those fuel stations. And it got me thinking their core business is still selling fuel, just like our club's business will always be providing rugby. But how they've looked at generating more revenue from different streams going forward. So they're still in the same location, they've still got the same core business, but they've begun to broaden out and think about doing many, many different things. And our clubs are so important to us because without them, we just don't have the playing pitches. And this is where many other sports, when we communicate with them, and indeed many of the other unions across the world, just don't have the same infrastructure as us. And it's really important we do everything we can to preserve those clubs and the facilities. Many of them who were given to those clubs 50, 60, 70, 80, some over 100 years ago now, well over 100 years. Once they're gone, they're gone, and we'll struggle to get them back. So preserving those assets is key, as are the volunteers who run those clubs. Absolutely crucial that we keep them engaged and involved. Looking at our competition structures going forward, many people will know we're in the midst at the moment of a look at what the future competition structure might be, based very heavily on insight from players, particularly, who it's very clear the majority don't want to play as often, want more breaks during the season, and many don't want to travel quite as far. The days of a Saturday being totally devoted to rugby, or a Sunday totally devoted to rugby, are probably gone for many players. It's still sacrosanct for some, but generalising for the majority, probably gone. And in terms of playing options, 15s is still key for us all. It's still at the core of everything we do, but we really do need to think laterally. The important thing here is that the oval-shaped ball stays in as many people's hands as it can, and as many people as possible get a rugby experience. The women and girls game, I know it was featured heavily on the community slot I listened to this morning, and some amazing work going on there. It really is our growth area. It feels like we're beginning to break the back of it. It feels like it's much more accepted now in clubs and in our sport than it perhaps was even 5 or 6 years ago. And that really is where our growth headroom is going to come. 14 to 18-year-olds remains critical for us. When we transition players into adult rugby is when we continue to lose many rugby players. And we've often coined a phrase that if we could take the 15-year-old rugby player and turn them into a 25-year-old rugby player, all our other problems would go away. And that's just going to be as much centre after lockdown as it is before. And diversifying our game. I'll probably finish on this one. The women and girls game clearly has been instrumental over the last few years. I think many of us involved in the sport would know and would say that we are probably one of, if not the most inclusive sports. If you get down to a local rugby club, it's incredibly inclusive, welcoming everyone in. Yet we still wear this sort of badge on our arm of being an exclusive sport. The perception is we're still a very exclusive sport. And how we broaden our reach and how we attract more participants from the BME community, particularly where we're very underrepresented still, and how within our coaches and our referees and our volunteers pool, we start to represent much more the communities in which our clubs actually sit. The communities around our rugby clubs have diversified massively over the last 20 years, and yet our playing base, our coaching base, our refereeing base, our volunteer base probably hasn't diversified in quite the same way as that local community. It isn't quite as reflective of the local community as it was. There's some amazing work going on in clubs the length and breadth of the country. And again, we listened to some of that this morning, some unbelievable work. And our job now must be, with all of your help, to take that common practice and really work hard at making it best practice. So it's been a challenging few months. It'll be a challenging next few years, but I genuinely believe this is a bit of a once in a lifetime opportunity to put aside our conflicts and really unite everybody involved in rugby, and let's make sure we keep our sport right up there as a sport of choice for many. Look forward to some questions.
Thank you so much for that, Steve. Really informative and really opening up about everything that's going on at the RFU and your plans and thoughts behind it. I think one of the overarching things that's come across in what you're saying there, and indeed with every single speaker that we've had over the course of this fabulous few days, has been whether they've won the World Cup or whether they, and one of the guys was describing how he kind of he rolls out of bed, rolls onto the pitch, but his love of the game, maybe not his fitness, but his love of the game was totally committed. Sorry, Sean, for dropping you in on that one. But it's community and it's passion, and it starts at grassroots. So you're talking about everyone coming together and you're talking about challenges. We've got a lot of questions coming in. One of the first questions is actually talking about how schools can play a more active part in helping grassroots rugby. So how can we be engaging more with schools? What can we be doing? And indeed, what are you doing as the RFU to make sure it's more on the school's agenda?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so, I mean, one of the big things we've done over the last 7-8 years, we launched it in 2012. It was a major part of our Rugby World Cup 2015 legacy program, is we launched a program called All Schools. And this was really trying to demonstrate that rugby is a game that can be played by all schools. It's a game that can be played by all the students in the school. And we're a game that has an impact on all of the school life, not just out on the field, with the values of the game being so important. And we hit the target in September last year of 750 new state secondary schools that weren't currently playing rugby, having some sort of rugby program there. So that's about 1 in 4 rugby schools, 1 in 4 state secondary schools in England that weren't playing rugby in 2012 that now are. And, my big plea now really is for any of our clubs that are listening. It's the club now, I think, reaching back into the school, because our big challenge now is clearly transitioning those players from the school environment into the club environment. And I think it's a piece of work that our clubs can play a really important role on. Many of our PE teachers in state schools have never played rugby, which means that putting it onto the curriculum is a challenge for them. So taking expertise and energy and coaching, and I know it's challenging because people have day jobs, but trying to get that into schools, starting to run after school clubs is I think really important, and it's a key part of that player pipeline for us.
And I think also, so my children, one of my children is still at primary school, and she undertakes an after school tag rugby club, and that's been set up in his own time by the head teacher, Mr. Blackburn, as Fordcombe Primary. Well done, you, Mr. Blackburn. But he's been really passionate in it. But a lot of it actually, it can be driven within the schools by parents. So would you advocate us as people that are passionate about rugby to actively volunteer? Is this an opportunity? How would you have us go about doing that? What can we be doing to make a difference?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we still have to recognise that we're a technically challenging game to understand if you've never played it. And even tag and touch, the concept of sort of moving forward with a ball that's going backwards is not one that's sort of natural to many people. And I think we know that in the majority of primary schools and secondary schools, the sports that are used to teach the curriculum are ones that people feel comfortable with. So absolutely, if we can just get more, particularly in primary schools, if we can just get more rugby balls in there, more oval-shaped balls into primary schools, and honestly, if we get kids coming out at the age of 11 who can move forward whilst passing an oval-shaped ball backwards, then we've got something that's unique compared to other sports, and it's great if people can volunteer and go and get that onto the programme in schools, and just start with getting some rugby balls into those schools, as well as the more traditional round balls that we see too many of.
Well, indeed. So there's a few questions coming through, not surprisingly, talking about finance. You voiced yourself the fact that there's a significant revenue deficit that the RFU is going to be experiencing. We've seen the kind of well-publicised cuts below the Premiership level. So how can the RFU support and help protect grassroots rugby and give it an opportunity to prosper given these new financial constraints where they're more needy than ever?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first and important thing to say is that the RFU is a relatively small contributor to the community game. I mean, we put more into the community game than any other union does, but it's still dwarfed by the amount of money that clubs themselves actually generate and actually put into this. So, it's not like we are the prime investor in the community game. And what we have to do now is we have to work a lot harder to think about, and again, this is where we need real input from clubs. Where can our pound make the greatest difference? We clearly want to continue with things like, we provide blanket liability insurance for all of our clubs, coaches, referees. That costs a considerable amount of money, and something like that is going to continue to be really important, I think, to us and to clubs. And then, aside from that, clearly helping clubs to help themselves and helping clubs to become more sustainable is probably where we can best put our effort. Rather than contributing extensively to the P&L of a club. So our investment going in, one of the projects we did, and we're looking to sort of reincarnate, is around the Rugby World Cup in 2015. We invested in social spaces. So, relatively small capital facility grants, £5,000-10,000, which clubs matched, but was backed up by some real support to rejuvenate the bar areas. We had club volunteers going on interior design courses, which sounds crazy, but actually ripping up the old beer-stained carpet and putting laminate flooring down, taking the grotty old curtains down from the windows and putting some blinds up, and installing a bit better lighting, and in some places a posh coffee machine. All of a sudden, the revenues in clubs were starting to rise quite significantly. So, sort of small investment, which can spear a longer term gain for those clubs, is, I think, where we are likely to be focused.
And you talked before, I know when we've spoken before, you've talked about looking to other sports that might be able to live alongside, and then the rugby clubs who have this platform and this facility to be able to monetize that. Can you talk us through how that works as an idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think because many rugby clubs, not them all clearly, but many rugby clubs own their own facilities or have got long leases on their facilities. And often around the rugby club itself, there are little bits of land, there are often indoor spaces that could be utilised by other sporting groups and other community groups. So martial arts, keep fit, some of the other sort of smaller sports, even some of the clubs that have got reasonable size club rooms where a table tennis club could make it its base. Many of these clubs who typically use school facilities or leisure centre facilities, but they're paying out to hire them, and there's no bar facilities there afterwards for their members to enjoy. Even car parks, car parks that have got decent lighting that are tarmacked that could quite easily have netball courts marked on them, or the club could maybe be used as the base for a cycling club or a running club. And I think there's a real genuine opportunity there. And the other thing that does is it exposes those members of those clubs to rugby and to the rugby club and to the rugby family and to a sort of community hub. Some of them may even pick up a ball again or bring their kids down to pick a ball up.
No, I mean, I think diversification is what you've been talking about, and I guess it's difficult to often think of the game that we love as being a business, but I guess in terms of commercially keeping it going, it's one of the things you have to look at. We've got some good questions coming through on. We've got one here from Alex Gardner. You were talking about this being an opportunity to almost restart the game and look at it in a way we've never looked at it before. Do you see potential permanent changes to the game as we play and know it now?
I think the game as we know it now will always be there, but whether it's the one size fits all and whether there are variations that might encourage more people to come in, so sort of different formats of the game, I think we maybe need to think quite hard about. And I think we also need to think going forward. For a group of younger players that are just coming in and are maybe going to start their life out in third team adult rugby, is the sort of the intensity of the game and the physicality of the game what they want to do anymore. A lot of the insight that we're getting from 16, 17, 18-year-olds is they really don't want to play with people who are old enough to be their parents who've been playing for 20 odd years. They don't want something that's perhaps as physical as the game is now. So I think the core of our game will always be there, but the diversification of the game, in the same way as we talked about the diversification of the revenue, is almost certainly, I think, where we'll see ourselves going.
And the RFU have given guidelines before. If you, I think it was last year, you put out an initiative that let's keep the game going. So if you can't get 15 aside, reduce your numbers down. We've got a panel coming up this afternoon all about the sevens, the need for speed, and the changing nature of that game. We've got Rugby X as a new format now. So do you think there's going to be more impact and more of the driving of the growth coming from smaller sized teams? And where do you see that fitting?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's if you take American football out of the equation with a team sport that requires significantly more players than anybody else. If we think about what it takes to get a game of rugby played, we need at least 30 players plus some benches, plus match officials, plus coaches, plus medics. It's a huge number of people. And increasingly, people in society are just wanting to consume sport in a very different way, which is a lot more instant. So I think we have to look to put things alongside that heavily organised, highly structured offer. And even if we do simple stuff like go back to the discussion about schools, it's just not possible to travel with 15 people or 18 people in a minibus anymore with a couple of teachers. It's just too big. So thinking about smaller sided games, which ultimately can act as either as a game in their own right or can work as an introduction up to the 15-a-side game, I think is inevitable.
Okay, thank you. And we've got a good question here from Carol Thelwell Jones. Great name. Given the current circumstances, will the game mark the 150th anniversary of the formation of the RFU in January 2021? And do we see this as an opportunity to highlight our longevity, resilience, and generate some momentum for this rugby reboot?
Yeah, thanks, Carol, and hello. We know each other well. Yeah, the plans were underway, quite extensive plans to celebrate the 150th anniversary. I think, assuming that we're playing rugby by then, of course, we will absolutely want to continue to do that. And I think it's one of many things, hopefully, that the sort of uniting of the game, the solidarity of our communities through rugby and the 150th anniversary provide us with some great opportunities as we go into 2021 to shout really loudly about all the really positive things about our game.
Brilliant, thank you. And we've got just a time for a couple more. They're still coming in thick and fast, as you can imagine, Steve. Lots of people wanting to ask you things. We've got a question from our charity partner for the event, Delalio Rugby Works, the organisation that we're raising money for. So do remember, please do give whatever you can give. So they're asking the question: how important is it to support organisations and charities that engage with young people at community level to help them participate in local rugby?
Yeah, I mean, Delalia Rugby Works do some fantastic work, and we're delighted to have partnered with them for a number of years. And I think what they've got the ability to do, and other organisations like them at both national and local level, is to engage with a group of youngsters that many clubs would find it quite difficult to do. They, by the very nature of the position that those youngsters find themselves in, they need much more intensive support. And Delalia Rugby Works do a fantastic job at that. And I think if they can continue to do even more of that, what they're going to do is help immensely with this whole diversity agenda, and hopefully introduce a group of youngsters to rugby that would never have got introduced to rugby. If our clubs can then really focus on welcoming those youngsters in and making them a part of their club, which I just know the majority of our clubs would want to do, then we've got a whole cohort of new people playing our sport.
Yeah, which is exactly what we need. I mean, so many clubs talking through the course of the last couple of days, saying how player recruitment remains a significant issue, and something you've addressed on a number of your questions and answers there. Final question. Obviously, everyone is trying to get the attention of the government at the moment. It goes without saying, and they've got quite a lot on their plate. How can the RFU go about making sure that rugby is much higher up the agenda? Because obviously it gets all the coverage and has all the money in it. But how can we make sure, and how can you guys make sure, that rugby is top of every minister's agenda?
Yeah, I mean, we are, rest assured, we're in daily conversations at the moment with various people in government about this, and we want to make sure that at the point that sport can return, that we're right up there. I think there's a particular opportunity as well here around, and I know you had a panel earlier on it, around the women's game. Across government and across sports, there's been such huge strides taken over the last few years, and particularly ourselves, football and cricket, are working together and seeing a huge amount of interest from government at the moment, who are really keen to make sure that the growth and the momentum that those three sports, along with netball and hockey, have made over the last few years isn't lost. And I think the other piece of it is we're working really hard as well to demonstrate to government the fantastic work that our community clubs have been doing, and getting government and others to realise that these are more than rugby clubs. They're actually community centres doing some amazing work in their local communities, and rugby in many of them is the vehicle and the tool. And I think we're getting some real understanding of that. But to anyone out there as well, I'd really encourage you in clubs to, on this front, make sure that your local MPs know about the great work you're doing, and make sure that you communicate with them, because that can only help the overall cause too.
Great advice, Steve. And I think that's it. We all have to stride out together to drive the change that we want, and to encourage that rugby is still on that agenda. Steve Grainger, Rugby Development Director for the RFU, thank you so much for your time, for so many questions and so much information. It's been absolutely brilliant. Really delighted to have you on the Virtual Rugby Show. And I look forward to catching up at Twickenham next when we're able to, so we can talk about a live version for next year. But this has been great. Thank you again.